Hi, it's Andy, and if you know me, you know I like to use whiteboards a lot, so I decided to bring one out for this week. And some of you may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the hierarchy of needs theory that he developed in the 1940s. And we're going to talk about this as it relates to our idea of more. If you watched the sermon yesterday, I used 1 Samuel 14 and the story of Jonathan and his armor bearer to reveal how we need to do more, but a part of doing more and having motivation is reliant upon the needs that we have. And really, this theory that Maslow developed was based upon our motivations, what our needs are. So these 5 levels represent Maslow. And this is not from a Christian perspective, but I'm going to tie that in over the course of these next 4 days. I'm going to do the motivation today, observant tomorrow, responsive on Wednesday, and engaged on Thursday. So with that, the first two, the bottom 2 here, these are our physiological needs. And when we're talking about motivation, we don't know the motivation that Jonathan had in this, but one of the motivations for any of us, according to Maslow, and I think there's a lot of truth in this, is that when our physiological needs are not met, we don't care about anything else. So what are physiological needs? Well, basic needs. The basic needs, physiological and safety. What are the basic needs? Well, the physiological needs are food, water, air. You know, we don't care about air as long as we have air, but when you can't breathe, if you get the wind knocked out of you, for instance, all of a sudden you're not worried about whether you're going to eat a hamburger that night or not eat ever again. All you want in that moment is air. And so we have these when you're cold, you want warmth, right? So these are physiological. This is a part of our basic need structure. Within that, though, we also have safety. And I think this is a part of what may have driven Jonathan for using this model of needs, is that the Israelites needed safety from their enemies, the Philistines. And so, at a very basic level, these are the kinds of needs that can motivate us. Now, we must understand that Jonathan was ambitious. He showed ambition, and some people will say, ambition is not a godly character. And yet, that's not true, because in 1 Timothy chapter 3, which is the most expansive, verses 1 through 7 are the most expansive description of what an elder is to be, of what a pastor is to be, the very first thing that Paul says before he gives the qualifications is that if anyone aspires to be an overseer, to be an elder, to be a pastor. And the word aspires, you can't define the word aspires without using the word ambitious or a synonym for ambitious. So there is a sense, there is an element of ambition, but the question is that ambition turned inwardly? Is this all about what I can gain and what I get out of this? Or is that ambition for the purpose of something or someone else? For Jonathan, certainly his safety was at risk. But apparently, he had enough food and water. If you read the rest of that story in the next several verses, beginning in verse 24, I think it's about verse 28 or 29, where he takes some honey to eat. And he was hungry. And it said that the honey lit his eyes up. It gave him energy all of a sudden. So he had physiological needs in that. But when our basic needs are met, we do have the opportunity to move on. Now, as we move up, we actually have to think about the psychological needs, which are here, and then ultimately the final one is what we call self-actualization, or what Maslow called self-actualization. And when we get to Thursday, I'm going to redefine this from a Christian perspective. But again, we can see that this is a need for Christians to have love, to have belonging, to have purpose together. Not just to have purpose, but to have purpose together. And then what we do can fulfill us. But ultimately, as I'll show on Wednesday, it's not just about fulfilling us, it is about fulfilling what God wants from us. So, as we enter into March 2021 and some of the darkness begins to fade away, maybe the shadows of COVID begin to fade a little bit as well, certainly we realize that the issue is not yet resolved. But we see a little bit of hope. We see a little bit of encouragement. We must realize that over the last year, for most people, this has been the entire focus. This has been the entire motivation, Christian or not. Am I going to live? Am I going to be able to breathe clean air? Am I going to be able to get things that I need to live? Am I going to go to the store and all of the shelves are going to be empty? Not just toilet paper, but cereal and sugar and everything else when the stores were empty last March and April. Are my needs going to be able to be met? Am I going to be safe? Am I going to get COVID? Am I going to end up sick? Am I going to end up in the hospital? What about my family? And when all of our focus is on these bottom two needs, our motivation is only to satisfy these. And so what we had a country that withdrew. We had a country in the initial days of COVID last year, beginning around March the 12th and 13th, all the way through April and even a little bit beyond that. And for some places, this still is ongoing. They're still not able to get out. Churches in some parts of the country still haven't met at all. And so I'm very thankful for our opportunity to do that here. But the point being that for a period of time, nobody wanted to. I mean, on March the 15th, March the 16th of 2020, some of us wondered if we could just walk outside, breathe air, and die. That was a little exaggeration, but we just didn't know much about this virus. And as we learned more about it, some got more frightened, some got a little bit less. You might remember the sermon I preached on March 15th last year, the last Sunday we met before our 8-week break. And that Sunday was fear is real, but it need not rule. That was the premise of it, using one of the Psalms to talk about the fact that David was fearful. And in, I think it was 43% of that psalm, he expressed fear. Psalm 56, he expressed fear in a heavy number of verses, but overall, he said, it is in God whom I trust. So these needs are real. These basic needs are real, and it has kept many people from coming to churches. It has kept many people from doing things. The motivation has been, let me be protected, let my family be safe, and I'm not here to convict anybody about that. We all have to make our own decisions, but here's what I do know. The motivations need to begin to change as we move beyond COVID. Whenever that might be, we need to move into these, because if this has been our whole focus, we've lost touch with a lot of people. We haven't been motivated to maintain relationships, to maintain friendships. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. But the idea is for many, this has been the only focus. This has been the only source of motivation. But there is a greater motivation that we can have. And what we see in Jonathan from 1 Samuel 14, and what we see throughout the Bible, and what we need to see in us, is that ultimately, we need to not only self-actualize, but we need to God-actualize in ourselves. And we can only do that when we feel like these other needs have been met. So as you find yourself finding these other needs met, I encourage you, move up the scale. The scale isn't perfect, but move up the scale to where ultimately you can see God at work. Be motivated to do more so that you can be here with God.